Hi, everyone. Welcome to our AMA with Claudia Reuter, who is the founder of Yes, You Can Do This. I'm so excited to be talking to her today about this book, which I'm a huge fan of, and the whole premise around, creating your destiny is just something that really resonates with me. So welcome, Claudia.
Hey, Jenny, thanks so much for doing this with me. I'm really excited to be able to talk about the book and talk about what's going on in the world right now and be part of this. So
lots is going on in the world, so we've got lots to talk about.
Just a little, right?
Yeah. So just want to tell everyone, hi. Tell us where you're tuning in from. So you can do that in the chat. Tell us, where you're from, what's going on, and then there's questions at the bottom. So you can ask a question, and Claudia and I, after chatting for maybe 20, 30 minutes, we're gonna start going through the questions. So please be active with your questions. We're really excited to hear more. So, oh my goodness, I see Hilla from Tel Aviv tuning in already. Hi, Hilla. Excited to see everyone. Great. Well, I'd love to kick it off just a little bit more kind of about your journey, Claudia, because it's so fascinating how you started your company, when you started your company, and a little bit about the context around that. So love to get some background.
Yeah, no, happy to. So I'm a mom. I'm married with 2 teenage boys, and I started a company a long time ago for unconventional reasons. I had stepped out. I'd been working for an investment company and in tech, and I had stepped out of the workforce when I had my first kids, and I was staying at home, doing all the things stay-at-home moms do, and realized I wanted to at some point start to get back into the world of traditional work and hopefully contribute financially to my family, and realized pretty early on that the paths that were in front of me in the traditional work structure weren't really clear or evident to me at the time, but started to think about some opportunities for starting my own company, and actually, was able to brainstorm with my husband and ultimately started a SaaS company that I was very fortunate and able to raise capital for. And ultimately, we were acquired by another company in 2014. So it was a long journey, an exciting journey, but one that was really an unconventional step, that helped me really see that, by starting your own company, there's obviously the idea of, progress you can make for yourself, for the business. But I think there's a missed opportunity in conversations right now on how really starting a business can be a path forward for women in leadership and a way to change some of the stats that we've got in front of us right now, which I'm excited to talk more about.
Can we, something you said kind of right at the beginning really struck me. It was that there weren't necessarily all these opportunities for women. So can you just talk a little bit more? Was that kind of coming back into the workforce that you didn't see those opportunities, or what was it?
Yeah, my oldest son is now 17, excuse me, in a junior high school. I know, and everyone's at home right now. But when I was starting to think about going back into the world of work, and I see this now as a pattern over the course of my career, it seemed like the opportunities in front of me were ones where I would have to explain away why I had stepped away. So I felt like, and maybe some of that was internalized unconscious bias on my part, but I remember feeling like, okay, I have to figure out how to explain away these gap years. I have to figure out, what skills that I used to have, are they still relevant? Who's going to want to hire me now? Where do I fit into the system? And I felt like I was trying to explain away things. And whereas right now, I look back and I think, hey, I was actually able to start a company and build things forward. And a lot of the skills I have developed as a stay-at-home mom actually helped make that path easier for me. And so I'm really trying to think about, how do we move women from thinking about caregiving or that type of activity as something that's something to be apologizing for, versus something that actually helps elevate women and what we're doing. Because I see plenty of men who might take a break for different reasons and come back in with more confidence.
Yeah, that's actually a great point. I think we should kind of get into that motivation later. I know I probably get, one or two people contact me, either through people or just directly. And many of them are not actually re-entering the workforce, but they're changing career. So that's kind of another hurdle that I see. So any, how does this, the book really relate to like a change in career? So many of these women have been corporate and now they want to either go into startups or they want to become consultants or they want to, actually have their own businesses. So how does that kind of fit in?
Yeah, I think there's a missed opportunity oftentimes for people to think about the skills that they're developing and how they translate or how they relate to other things you want to do. Sometimes it's easy to get caught up in these are the 10 things that I've done, and now I'm going to go find another job where I do these exact same 10 things plus one more. And really, it's an opportunity to look at, okay, what are the things that you did where you provided value, and how does that translate to the new opportunity you're trying to go after? So maybe there was something very entrepreneurial that you did at a corporation that you've worked for, where you took initiative on a project or you led something to achieve a certain goal, and that could be things that are going to help you as you go out and set your own path, and vice versa. The time you might have gone ahead and done something on your own, but even if you're volunteering, think about what was the outcome you were trying to achieve, how did you go after and achieve that outcome, and then how might that translate to something else that you want to do.
Yeah, that's great. So whether you're re-entering the workforce or you're changing careers, I want to talk a little bit more about why now is a great time for people, women in particular, to start a startup. I mean, we are in a pandemic, right? This is an interesting moment in time. And we are potentially going into recession. And so just kind of looking back, like when you started your company, I started my company in 2006, had to raise capital in 2008, which was, the year that Lehman collapsed, and like really felt some challenges, but I also think it was an interesting opportunity. So how do you see now?
Well, I mean, one, I think it's really interesting that right now there's strangely a leveling of playing field that's happened. We're all in, our home environments. If you have kids, no matter where you are, no one has childcare right now. So everyone's kind of got somewhat of a shared experience. But of course, for some folks who are suddenly find themselves out of work, it's a much more challenging place to be right now. But thinking about the fact that like creativity often comes from constraints. And new ideas often emerge from challenging situations. And if we do look back at the last kind of recession, and you and I talked about this earlier, there's a whole bunch of companies that we're all familiar with now that were started around that time. And there's a whole, whether it's Slack or Instagram, and a whole number of companies that have really helped change and transform the way in which we live. And I if we think about like Uber or Lyft and how we get around has dramatically changed because of the startup. And so if we think about where we are right now in our home environments, and suddenly the new habits we might be developing, the new awareness of why we're doing the things we're doing, it's actually a great moment in time, I think, for all of us to take a step back and rethink, what are we really doing here? And like, what are the new opportunities that might come from this? And that could look like new software solutions that enable better communication or better education for folks. It might look like something totally different in terms of food delivery or supply chain. I think there's just a ton of opportunity right now to get really creative and rethink everything from the supply chain to the way in which we're communicating with each other.
100%. Anyone who's familiar with venture capital will know that, the cohort data, the companies that were started in, 2008, 2009 have been some of the best performing companies in VC's portfolios. So, the data does show that cohort has really produced. So, I feel the same way. Like, it's a super exciting time. On the flip side, there's less access to resources and capital. And so you have to be super efficient. And interestingly, some of the other data has shown that, women, because they are, oftentimes less funded, they have to be more capital efficient anyway. And so they're kind of used to this dichotomy. So, especially for all the women that are tuning in, this is, kind of an incredible time to start a company. And I think taps into your natural skills of doing more with less. I'd love to change the topic a little bit to the lean in movement and what we mean by leaning in by starting up, and how that's really a path to leadership. I know that you kind of start your book really talking about lean in, and love to see how that fits.
Yeah, so I'm actually, I'm a big advocate of Lean In. I was actually, I was on the Lean In website in 2013 as an example on taking risks. So I'm pretty passionate about the idea, the core idea behind Lean In of, really elevating women leaders and looking for opportunities to advance your career. That said, I do think in the last few years, we've seen what I consider a false dichotomy that's emerged in media, where there's this discussion that's kind of emerged of, hey, are you leaning in or are you leaning out? As if to imply like these are the choices that we have. We can either double down on our careers, or we can, think about family or other, pursuits. And my point, or my goal here, is to help people hopefully see that by starting your own company, it's another pathway to not only immediately step into leadership and to build something, regardless of how far along that journey you go. But it's also an opportunity to say, hey, as you step into a leadership role, this is your chance to rethink the structures that make all of this seem so difficult. Like, so rather than putting out a false dichotomy or false argument on should we lean in or lean out, instead we can say, how do you lean in by starting up? How do you lean in by building a new business? How do you lean in by thinking about what should the workday structure really look like? If we could whiteboard this whole thing and start over, would we have a 9-to-5 structure that doesn't align with a school day? Would we, have the work environments we have? We've seen a lot of changes over the years to the world of work, where we've all recognized sort of the importance of open workspaces, more collaboration, taking down big cubicle walls, opting for more, casual work dress. I'm old enough to remember when jeans were a big deal on Fridays, right? And so, there's been all these things that have changed over the years, and yet they've been like incremental changes with the assumption that the way it is the way it would always have to be, and we could incrementally improve upon it. And I'm kind of putting this out there as like, hey, let's think about, if we're really going to lean in, how we rethink all the structures that have made it more challenging for women to get ahead in business. So.
And what about around the path to leadership? So can you kind of talk like a little more specifically about how it can be a catalyst?
Yeah, so when you start your own company, you are taking this giant leap into leadership, where you're thinking about everything from the financial operations of your business to the product strategy to business development deals that need to happen, and then as things grow to obviously from a hiring perspective. So there's no other kind of entry point that you can think of where you're going to get a full set of experiences, for better or worse, across all the quote unquote like divisions that build up in companies over time. So you by default take accountability, responsibility for the outcome. We talk a lot about the fact that a lot of startups, some succeed, some fail, and like we all need to get comfortable with failure. I like to remind people that it's also really scary to fail, and it's okay to be frightened of that. But that taking that leap into leadership means having like true accountability for the outcome, and that's something that whether you stay with your company or go on to a larger organization, being able to take responsibility for outcome and lead others to it is something that it's definitely a transferable skill.
Awesome. I'd love to switch over to talking a little more about the structure of the book. So I was lucky enough to be an early reader of your draft. And I remember when you sent it to me, it was like, I don't know, a cold winter night or something. And, I was like on my couch and I read the whole thing. And what I loved about it was how you weaved in the narrative of the characters. So it was like, I was really excited to see like how these characters played out in the different chapters. So really, like, how did you come up with that structure where it feels kind of like a nonfiction book?
Yeah, so I really wasn't originally thinking of going down that path, but as I was trying to write for each chapter and think about what were the takeaways that I hoped readers would get, I realized that I wasn't going to be able to help demonstrate or articulate all the different takeaways through just my own set of experiences. And so I wanted to create some like archetype type characters that hopefully people will relate to as they're reading the book, that help make some of the points more clear. So versus just me top down telling people about research that I came across and why I think it's important, I tried to make that come to life with the examples of the characters. So, and I got really attached to them as I was writing. It became a really interesting process of, each chapter has like an anecdote that's happening among the characters. And then the second half of each chapter leads to tangible takeaways on, okay, this was the problem identified. Here's how they could solve it. So
yeah, I thought it was really clever because I'm not, I think like self-help books are sometimes hard for me, and then business books can be kind of dry. So I love that it had that like nonfiction element. So you have characters at different stages of their professional journey in the book, ranging from more junior to very experienced. What led you to have one character focused on motherhood? I mean, clearly from your origin story, that's something that resonated with you.
Yeah, I think motherhood is sometimes the elephant in the room. So the reality is 85% of women become mothers at some point. And I know personally, and among a lot of my colleagues and friends, I think there's a lot of, and this is changing now that we're all working remote, right? And we're all seeing kind of the whole person in different aspects of their world of work. But traditionally, there's been a real need or pressure for women to compartmentalize what their personal life might look like, and kind of hide, what their role as a parent is like. And again, sometimes feel like, there's almost a motherhood penalty on if you've had to step away for caregiving or whatever the need may be, to kind of feel like you need to explain that away. And so I wanted to call out and show an example in the book of one character and some of the challenges or things that she did in her day and how those actually translated to management, and start to really just call it out for what it's worth. So there's one character in the book who does have kids, and hopefully I've painted a picture of how some of the things you do when you're taking caregiving seriously actually translate pretty well into management later on.
That's interesting. I mean, clearly, parenthood in general has come into the forefront as where everyone's, at home, and they, kids are running around and coming into Zoom calls. So, I think that has a lot of relevance right now. And you write about the structures that make things challenging for women and highlight the workday, which I think is really being, escalated right now. So how does the workday traditional structure relate to starting up?
So in terms of starting up, when you start, one of the things that's so exciting about starting a company, and if I were doing another one today, I would be more thoughtful about this at the origin, so to speak, is when you start up, you determine your own hours. Initially your first steps might be alone. So you're definitely determining all your hours, whether you're working at 2 a.m. or midnight. There's another author, Laura Vanderkam, who talks about time management and how we kind of have all decided to time box the 40-hour work week as the time in which we work. But if you really look at the number of hours in a day and the amount of time we spend, sleeping or eating, there's actually quite a bit of extra time to work on separate projects or creative pursuits. And it's really tempting sometimes to think, oh, I worked my 40 hours and that's it. Really, just when you're starting a company, you're working around the clock. When you're parenting or, with kids, you're also working around the clock. And so I think there's this opportunity to think about, okay, if I'm starting a business or if I'm taking on a leadership role, how do I move people from thinking about seat time to thinking about outcomes? Because if we think about outcomes, then everyone can align and drive around that. That's how, at Techstars, we have a global distributed company, right? We're obviously working in time zones around the world. The goal becomes the outcome of what did we all achieve, not what did you stay in the office from 9 to 5 and doing this particular thing. It's more about outcome than seat time. And so startups are by necessity, and a startup, you have to be thinking about outcome because that's actually all that matters in the beginning. And keeping that in mind as things grow is important. So
there's a question here, which I'm going to get to, because my next question was really around community and how you can start up if you don't come from the startup world, how you can have a community that really supports you. So there's a great question that says, I've heard from individuals who have started their own businesses that they wish they had more mentorship before launching their own business. What are some of the strategies you'd recommend to seek mentorship and to build strong, meaningful relationships while starting your own business? So, I mean, I can provide some, but you want to kick it off, Claudia?
Sure, yeah, and then I'd love to hear your perspective too, Jenny, because you have a lot of experience in the mentorship, communities. But one of the things I try to keep in mind is, it's not transactional. Like thinking about getting involved in, whether you're looking at local meetups and activities in your community, there's always in many communities, there's both virtual and in-person events. Obviously, in the world of COVID, in-person is limited at the moment. But typically you can find events that are catered towards things you might be interested in, whether they're ranging from meetups focused on women leaders to startups, rather software meetups, focus on a pure technology. So really just finding areas of interest and then not looking for something in return, I think is really important. I think like when you're networking and you're trying to meet people, it really should be about trying to find people that you can connect with and think about as much as what you can give as what you can get, and good things will come from that. I've been in some meetings or conversations where, someone might say like, will you mentor me? And there's nothing wrong with that, but it's not a transactional thing. In my mind, this is about long-term relationship investment on both sides.
I mean, I'm a big believer in community, and I'll tell you a funny story. I was on a podcast called The Pitch, where founders pitch investors and investors make commitments on the spot. And I ended up, literally on the spot, this woman gave like a 5-minute pitch. I ended up investing in her company that's called The Crew. The woman's name is Tiffany Duke. She's a force. But really what her company is about is peer mentorship, which I'm a big believer in. And so they help cultivate these kind of crews of women who get together on a consistent basis and support each other really in their goals that are work related, which is something I really related to. And I mean, it's just amazing. So everyone, please check out The Crew. But I think that these communities are popping up everywhere. Community is really the thing that I think can provide you the support that you need, and peer mentorship, I feel like is underrated, but so important. And that's really one of the things we try to do at Techstars. Like one of the most important parts of the program are the founders that are really bonding with each other. Even more so than the outside mentors that we're bringing in or the experts who come to talk about workshops. It's really about the founders supporting each other. So I think that it applies here, and just finding those outlets, whether it's through a startup weekend, a Techstars program, something like The Crew, I think is pretty powerful.
I love that you just brought up The Crew too, because that was for those who are tuning in, we didn't plan that, or I didn't know Jenny was going to say that. And this summer, when I was working on I have a podcast focused on telling more stories of women navigating career. And I had actually been in touch with Tiffany, and because I was so impressed by what she was working on. And she's a perfect example of, she couldn't join, but she immediately pointed to me to 3 other people. And, she's like, this is just about, I want to always be helping people connect. And I just remember being so kind of blown away by her ability to just give so generously and constantly look for connection with people. So
yeah. Well, I invested in her company after a 5-minute pitch. So there you go. The second part of that question is actually also interesting. And it says, naturally, when you work with or for someone, you build a history together by nature of physically being together and collaborating every day. And so, how do you kind of build that history if you're going into a new industry, right? Like, how do you build those bonds?
Well, I think it's different for every person. At Techstars, we obviously have a number of different ways that we bring people together. And, Jenny, as you know, like in an accelerator, you've got 10 different founders coming together, or 10 different companies rather, from anywhere in the world. And there is an aspect of, there's the planned activities, and then there's the informal activities, whether it's like grabbing dinner or, the side conversations that do lead to long-term relationships. But I think that there are still possibilities on ways to do that in distributed teams, as long as people are aligned on, what it is that we're trying to achieve. You will end up in natural conversations, and you will end up with, having those side conversations. So it's definitely easier in person, but I think there's plenty of opportunity virtually too.
Yeah, kind of dovetails into the next question. And please add your questions to the queue so we can get to them. Women have traditionally had less of a network. Do you believe we should rather bootstrap first rather than seek early stage funding? That's a very nuanced question, and obviously there isn't a right answer for everyone. I think you have to look at kind of the macro environment as well. So right now, it's pretty hard to fundraise, and going into a recession will also be hard. So it is a great time to figure out, how do I get to profitability quickly? How do I make sure my unit economics work, as opposed to I'm going to build a community and we're going to figure out monetization later. But Claudia, what do you think about bootstrapping first rather than seeking early stage money?
Yeah, I mean, to the extent that you can bootstrap, or to the extent that you can just drive to sales, that's obviously a win. But I would also say, don't let that stop you. If you think you've got something that really needs to scale, like it has the ability to scale and it's going to require funding, don't be afraid to put yourself out there and try to network and see what's possible. But the more to Jenny's point, the more you can bootstrap and the more you can just drive things, ultimately you'll own more of your company as well. So it's not a bad thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you shouldn't be discouraged by the environment right now or seeking capital. I do think one thing to think about is is your company venture fundable, right? And so many businesses that can grow to be amazing businesses are really classified as small businesses, many service businesses and otherwise. And so those are really hard to get off the ground without kind of friends and family support, because people won't really give you a loan and VCs don't want to invest. So those are just a different category of a product or service, and you have to really be kind of honest with yourself. Is this going to be the next Uber? Is this a massive business that can return a fund for my investors? And so really kind of understanding venture math, I also think is important. So.
Yeah, for sure. And it's taking that step too, before you even go anywhere, right? Of saying, okay, let's map this out. What's the biggest vision that this could be? Like, if I had all the resources available to me, how big would this opportunity truly be? And what would that look like? And then walk back, okay, what are the things I need to get there between now and that 5-year point, or whatever that is?
So just jumping back to the book, you reference a number of studies on conditioning and unconscious bias. So I'd love to hear some of the key takeaways that you hope the readers will get from that, and kind of dig in there a bit.
Yeah, I was really, as you know, in the investment community, there's a ton of stats out there on right now. I think it's less than 3% of venture capital funding went to women in 2019. And so I started to look at some of the studies that are out there on, well, what are some of the things that are happening that might be in some way? I don't think there's any one thing that's contributing to outcomes, but there's a need to look. And one of the studies highlighted the idea that sometimes in investor meetings, women are more likely to get questions on risk, whereas men are more likely to get questions on opportunity. And obviously, if you end up kind of going down a rabbit hole just talking about risk, that becomes a less appealing investment opportunity than someone who's been able to talk about how big this is going to be or how amazing this is going to be. So on one hand, I look at a study like that and I think, okay, clearly there's questioning that's wrong. Let's change that. But if you really start to dig in, there's actually additional studies that show that from a very young age, women are more conditioned to be compliant, and men are simply not conditioned to be compliant. They actually receive a lot of attention in early childhood for what we would consider a misbehavior. So if you start to think about how could these things correlate, it's like, okay, well, if you've been conditioned to be compliant, you're actually just more likely to answer a question on risk and be concerned with getting the answer right. Versus taking the conversation where you want it to go. So I really wanted to dig into both sides of the studies that were out there and start to think about not only how could we educate the investment community or the people on the other side of the table on, hey, be conscious of the type of questioning that you're doing, but how could we empower people on the other side of the table to say, okay, I hear your question, but I'm flipping it around to get you back to the conversation and what I'm trying to do with my business. And it was just super interesting to read about the fact that this starts at a really young age. And as I was digging into things and realizing like, hey, what other biases are out there that are just nestled in there that we're not even necessarily aware of? And I started thinking about the fact that, and Jenny, I know you've thought about this too, the idea that until 1974, women could not get credit without a male cosigner. Until 1978, you could still be discriminated against for pregnancy. And it's very easy in a concrete way to say, well, those laws are done with. Now the law isn't that. Obviously, you don't need a male cosigner for credit. But I think it's interesting to think about the idea that we may have all been raised with this subconscious messaging, like, because what does it mean to say you can't get credit without a male cosigner? It's really society saying we don't trust women with money. That's really what
it's the craziest thing that was 1974. I mean, I was like, it is shocking to me that, like, oh my God.
Exactly. And so I think about that and I'm like, that means my mom and her peers, even though they were, planning to, they were, it's not just, when it's a law, you're raised to believe that the law is there for a just and good reason, right? So if you're raised, and even if the law is changed, there's something in you that like holds on to, well, am I not trusted by society? And I can't help but believe that message hasn't been trickling down to our generation and beyond, just unconsciously. And that's one of the things I wanted to try to shed some light on in an effort to, because once you see it, you're like, oh my God, 1974, like no credit. And the pregnancy discrimination, I think, is a real thing to think about too, because even now,
and it exists today all the time within venture. I see it all the time where they see a woman comes in and pitches and she's pregnant, and then they're doing the math of like, okay, well, she's going to be out of the workforce for this long. How's she going to run the business? And even if they don't say anything, like the wheels are turning, right?
Exactly. And if men are more likely, if they were to be, sharing that they've got a family that's about to expand, they're perceived as more responsible, more likely to be someone that should be promoted or given opportunity. And women face this ongoing motherhood penalty. And that's one of the things I want to hopefully shed some light on, and hopefully we can start to move past that, because it's definitely still baked in. And the fact that was, fine, legally up until 78. To your point, it doesn't mean that the mindset has changed all that much. And it's such a visible experience that women have that, I think there's been such a history of people feeling like they need to hide things or compartmentalize aspects of their life. And again, I think this is why a potential benefit of this crazy situation we're in right now is shedding a little bit more light on what our whole selves actually look like, and also shedding a light on like, hey, we can still keep things going, and like, the company will be fine, or the business will be fine. So.
Yeah, no, it's super interesting. I mean, the unconscious bias with the questions, like I've done a bunch of, research on that, and just read so much about the kind of probing questions and the preventative questions that are being asked or not asked, and it's just fascinating. But I will, my piece of advice for when I coach women is like, especially when you're pitching to an investor, like you got to pitch that big picture, but then you have to get very granular and really know the specifics, because as soon as you pitch that big picture, they're all thinking like, I don't know if she can pull this off. This is so big. There's so much risk. And so if you can then get really granular and knowing your numbers just inside and out, that can be really helpful. So
I think that's such a good, and that's one of the things I tried to highlight in the book too, like where we don't, you're not necessarily required to show a full business plan at all stages of your company's growth, or even, if you're entrepreneurial inside a large organization working on something, but the process of doing it helps you get granular about those numbers. And, if you're like, I think Jenny, your point is really good also, that it's important to understand, like, and accept that you probably are going to experience unconscious bias, and like, just take it for what it is, and then figure out how to get the stats out in front that, demonstrate that you will be able to deliver.
Yeah, but unfortunately, I do think that women have to be kind of twice as prepared, really know their numbers inside and out, be ready to answer any question, and have that kind of level of confidence and professionality that men don't need to have. But I encourage women, that is the way to kind of win the game, unfortunately. So going back to the book, you referenced the importance of a company mission. Can you share a little bit more about what that means, and how that can be relevant in today's changing world of work?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that sometimes it's really easy to get caught up in the day-to-day or what you're trying to sell or build or whatnot, whether you're in a large company that you've joined that's owned by someone else, or you're doing your own thing. And so if you can really get aligned on what the mission is, whether that's, from a Techstars perspective, obviously we're focused on the experience of founders, but thinking through, what is my highest level mission? Like am I here to support, mobility and transportation? Am I here to make the lives easier of X, type of group? But really getting clear about what that mission is. And then as you're taking on new projects, or as you're taking on new customers, you can always be taking a step back and thinking, does this really align with my mission? And if it doesn't, is this still my mission? If it does align, then it's okay, let's keep going. So I guess my mission doesn't need to change, but it's one more way to have sort of a checkpoint on the actions that you're taking, and getting a better feel in a concrete way of whether what you're doing is short-term, short-sighted for just like quick revenue, or if it's really aligned to that big goal that you set out to achieve.
I mean, I think all founders feel that of, am I like that push and pull between growing a massive business and making sure that revenue is coming in the door and unit economics are sound. I think it's hard for any founder. I like the idea of like accountability. Do you suggest people like literally write it down and revisit it, or are there any tools that you like to use, or how do you kind of process that?
I mean, I'm obviously big into writing. I highly recommend that people write it down, but people have their own methods, obviously. But writing down your mission, writing down that big picture vision of where, if you think you're building something inside or outside that's designed to scale, really mapping out and writing down what does this world I live in look like 5 years from now, and think about what that means for you personally, as well as what that mean from a business perspective. And then just revisit these things you've written down on a weekly or bi-weekly basis, and just kind of, give yourself a check. Like, is the work I'm doing today going to help me get there? If it is, great. If it's not, where do you want to change it? Do you want to change the vision of where you're going, or do you want to change what you're doing? But clearly, like, you don't want to be doing something that's going to take you in the wrong direction. So,
right. So Natasha actually had a comment in the sidebar that I thought was interesting. An article I read a long time ago mentioned that men apply for jobs when they qualify for one requirement, a job description, and women more often apply only when they qualify for several of the requirements. That is something that you kind of mentioned, but is that something that you've seen?
Yeah, I've definitely seen it over the years. And I think this is that opportunity when you're thinking about applying for a new job, or and especially now in this world we're in, where people probably are going to be, shifting careers at some point. Again, going back and, if something is appealing to you, if you see a job that looks really exciting or something you want to pursue, don't limit yourself by thinking, oh, well, I haven't done, 2 out of the 10 things on the list that they're looking for. Stop and think, okay, I may not have direct experience in those 2 things, but is there anything that in my overall, portfolio of work that somehow aligns to that? So whether you were, the way in which you were engaging with a customer, or the way in which you were building a product. I mean, one of the things I think is important for people to think about is that, especially if you're in, say, product development, you're building new products. They've never been built before. So the transferable skill is the process of creating. In that case, it's not the outcome. So just taking time to think about where you've led, what vision you've had in your current job or current role, and also appreciating the value in it. I have heard, especially younger folks, sometimes earlier in their careers, I've heard people sort of wash over things they've done because they're like, oh, this isn't, you know, I'm above this job, or I'm above doing this work, and or this isn't what I prepared for in college. And I like to think of every job as something where you can provide value. If someone's willing to pay you, there's an inherent value in what you're doing, whether you're scooping ice cream or you're leading an organization. And so I try to, if you can think of what you're doing and how you're providing value and not just the motions of what you're going through, it's going to make it easier for you to think over time of how that's relatable to other things as well, without inflating it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a few good points in there. One of them is, if you find your dream company, take whatever job, and you'll be able to work your way up, right? And I always tell people that, if like Google is a place you want to work, there's so much opportunity there, and your average person at Google seems to move every 9 months into some other role. So, I wouldn't worry about titles if you're doing a career change, as much. Find a place that really resonates with your values and where you think there's growth opportunities if you're going to go that way. If you're going to start your own, then you can create that. But many people are really figuring out, well, I want to start something in the future, but I want to take that interim step and really learn what it's like to be a PM, right? So become a PM on like the smallest little button, on Facebook's whatever. And, you're going to learn and you're going to have a lot of opportunities. So
absolutely. And recognizing that there's value in that, like to your point, like it's okay to take we think of career paths times as completely like these career ladders that you have to constantly be going from rung to rung. And I do try to help people see like these career paths can be very nonlinear. They can have, twists and turns to them. You can jump off.
Everyone's always like, how did you get into venture? I'm like, well, I started as a lawyer, so I kind of am the poster child of always reinventing myself and always trying new things, and kind of going back to that point of like, if you're working with a headhunter or recruiter, it's quite hard because the recruiter wants those 10 things checked so that they can present those people. But if you're getting introductions to people, you can invent who you want to be, right? And you can take those skills and transfer them into whatever new role. And I've done that in finance. I've done that in law. I've done that in startups. I've done that in venture. I've never had a background in any of those things. And I've always had to learn on the job, but based on transferable skills. So.
That's awesome.
All right. So we have some other good questions. Please ask a few more. We've got, about 15 minutes. I'd love to get a few more questions from you. But this is one of my favorite questions because I can help. What advice would you give someone who's looking for a co-founder who's also technically skilled and can be a CTO? I mean, technical people have it really good. It's pretty easy to find non-technical co-founders. So I'm excited about whoever put that comment in. So, send me an email and I'm sure I can hook you up depending on what verticals you're looking at. So, this is one of the things that I see quite a bit is especially women starting companies potentially with other people, but they don't have technical talent on the team and they have to figure out how to outsource that or how to get around it. So, my advice is there's a lot of people, there's a lot of MBAs, there's a lot of business people that would love to pair up with you. So, have lots of ideas on finding co-founders. And there was another one on co-founder resources. So I don't know, Claudia, do you have any great advice on resources on how to choose and find co-founders?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's a one size fits all, but definitely this goes back to that networking and engagement within your communities. If you're looking for a technical co-founder, don't just, hope someone magically appears. Like, go to some local developer meetups, get a better understanding of what's being done out there and what people are excited about. And like I said, build genuine relationships. If you really are going to be working with someone in the long term, you don't want to jump right in and not really know the person. Like, take the time to get to know people, take the time to talk about how committed everyone is, and making sure that if you're really taking someone on as a co-founder, that they truly are a co-founder to your company, not just someone who's coming in to do a quick project or something.
Yeah, and all of these tips apply if you're looking for a technical co-founder, because I think that was a question as well. You have to get out there, and that is actually not a literal, not literally right now, but you have to be, at events with people that can connect you, meetups, all these things, whether it's virtual or in person. You have to put yourself out there. Really, one of the best things that most people don't take me up on is you got to start becoming, a thought leader in your space. So start writing blog posts. Who cares how long they are, how detailed they are, how good you think they are? Just start posting on Medium, right? And you're going to get 5, 10, 15 articles around whatever you're doing, and people are going to start to flock to you. The best way to attract anyone to your business is to be really mission driven and be passionate about your space and be able to find those other passionate people. You're probably not going to be able to, pull out a head engineer at Google to come join your startup by paying him or her, the salary that they're getting paid now. But what you can pull them out of Google is because they're inspired by this mission of this company, right? They really want to solve healthcare or fintech or, or whatever it is. Like, they've seen this as a burning problem. So your best asset really is your mission. So as you're looking for employees, for co-founders, for capital, you really have to wear that on your sleeve. And one of the best ways is to start writing, as Claudia did. Another great question. How do you go about creating a company with the culture and rules you are looking for? So what are some of, as you were starting your company, were you thoughtful about the culture? I can tell you that when I started my company, I was not. And it was 2006. I was trying to, I was leaving a career in banking. I didn't know anything about startups. And I was very focused on profitability, and I was very focused on work ethic, which are good things, but did not create a great culture and learned the hard way. And so it's interesting because now I spend a lot of time mentoring and kind of coaching founders that I've invested in on how important culture is, really from the experience of how bad it is if you don't create it. So any thoughts there, Claudia?
Yeah, no, I think this is like, the lessons learned through hard moments is I think that a lot of what I built or where things ended up were in some ways actually reactive, right? Like, because I was so focused on what is the experience of the customer, what is the experience that we're trying to deliver and what we're building or wherever that might be. And there were some positive things that came out of that, but I don't think I was as intentional enough as I could have been or should have been about it. And that's part of the reason that I, started to think about why this book would have been, like, when I joined Techstars actually a few years ago, I didn't join because I felt like I had all the answers and I was like, oh yeah, I want to go, join this company and because now I have the answers. I joined because I felt like, hey, I have some of the answers. I have some lessons learned, and I'm going to try to be the resource that I wish I had access to when I was younger. And so there's just some things, as Jenny was saying, you learn the hard way, and I'm hoping to help share with others, now here in this current moment. But definitely culture is something that I wish I had put more thought into. I think we had some really good positive moments, but I think at the same time, there's a way to be intentional about it. And it starts with writing it down, right? Writing down what are the rules that I want this organization to have? What is the structure I want this day to be like? How do I want people to feel when they come into the office? Like, really getting intentional about that at the very beginning, I think helps give you a framework that you can really build from.
Yeah, I think that intentionality, and then, really sticking with it and making sure it becomes part of your weekly stand-ups or your monthly meetings or whatever it is going back to that mission and that culture. Because if you don't, once you lose it, it's really hard. Then all of a sudden, which we lost it at our company, and it was, even as the CEO, it was hard to figure out how to get it back, right? Because once you kind of lose sight of that. So see another question here. If you had an idea 5 years ago of where women would be now, do you think we have made those inroads you might have projected, or is the process of gender equality and entrepreneurship taking somewhat more time to achieve? So, have we gotten to where we thought we would, Claudia?
No, I think we're at this interesting point where, we've got half of college graduates or more are women. We've got 70% of high school valedictorians are girls, right? So we have stats that demonstrate that, from an educational standpoint, things are, quote unquote equal. And yet when you look at the corporate landscape, less than 6% of Fortune 500 companies have a female CEO, less than 20% of corporate board seats are held by women. And so at the current rate of change, we're not going to get there anytime soon. So I'm looking at what are all the levers that we could start to pull that might start to level the playing field a little bit. And I think entrepreneurship is one of them. I think, there's other things that existing companies, can start to think about. But a lot of this goes back to, I feel like we're still all chipping away at a system that didn't include us at the beginning. When we think about that 1974 stat, the fact that the system did not account for women not that long ago, that is still the system. So we need to take a look at, how we can actually change sort of the mastership here, so to speak.
Great. And just to tell everyone that, this talk was really focused on, women starting businesses, but, really applicable to all founders and especially people that are diverse in any way. So, thanks for chiming in on that, Justin. It's a really good point that this, this is applicable and, hopefully helpful. I'd love to talk a little bit about some of the, someone asked about, I think they're in a specific vertical in the question, they're in life sciences. So do you believe that it's a particularly auspicious time now for female-funded life science startups, that was started recently? But I'd like to kind of expand that a little bit. Probably starting a hospitality company today might be hard, like literally just today, as we cannot leave our homes. But are there some areas that you feel like are particularly good time, especially for women to start right now?
A good time. I mean, I think that it all comes back to what are the challenges that we see, and how, are you building something that can solve one of those challenges? Like we're seeing firsthand, to your point, Jenny, maybe, a company that was focused on getting people together for an event, not the easiest time to start a company like that right now, and for in-person activities or something, but tons of opportunity around, obviously, solutions that can help from, telemedicine, obviously huge opportunities for, anything that can help with communication, with education of employees, or, bringing students, half of the country right now has kids home from school, and people are literally scrambling to figure out what resources are available. And I think we're just at this interesting moment where so many things that were perks, like working at home or being able to take an online class, are suddenly becoming necessities. And so it's like everything has kind of turned on its head. And I think there's going to be tons of unique opportunities out there. And it's just a matter of figuring out what problem you want to solve and how excited you are to do it and stick with it.
Yeah. And to specifically talk about life sciences, although it's not an area I know super well, I'd say that, this is a good time to really, figure out if there's grants, if there's non-dilutive funding, because as, belt tightening happens across venture, life science will also be hit. And so, this is a good time to kind of, buckle down and make sure that you've got alternative funding sources. And there's a lot out there. So I suggest you check out some of the government and grant type opportunities, especially life sciences. I mean, if it has anything to do with, with COVID, I think it's an incredible time, and there's tons of resources out there if you're kind of innovating on the health front.
Yeah, I believe the DoD just put out an initiative. They're allocating, I believe, $1 billion towards, companies and ideas that can, help solve for some of the challenges that COVID has presented. So to your point, there are definitely opportunities out there for non-dilutive grants and different types of funding.
Okay, so one of our last questions is going to be, what are some of the tips to stay motivated and consistent during this time? So what are you doing, Claudia, to make sure that you're staying motivated?
I mean, I think maintaining some type of schedule is really critical. I mean, I try to, and not to say that I have this all figured out and I do a perfect job every day of the week, but I'm pretty good about being diligent about waking up a few hours before my work day starts, so that I can get a handle on things, so that you can, get your thoughts organized. Also take some time for self-care, whether that's exercise or meditation. And that hasn't been as easy being in, for some reason, the pandemic has, made me far less excited about exercise, which is unfortunate. but really trying to, set a schedule for yourself. And, I'm a huge, as you know, I love to write things down. I start every day with a pretty significant to-do list, and I get a ton of enjoyment and satisfaction out of checking things off my list. So keeping that daily to-do list and put a couple of easy things on there for yourself. so you won't feel too bad if you don't hit them all, but definitely coming up with a list.
AMA with Claudia, I can check it off. Yeah. Those are great. Exercise for me is super important. Even if it's a small thing, like, going out for a run that's 2 miles or something, just to kind of make sure I get that. For me, like leaving the house, and living in New York City, it's been a little bit challenging, but just like going out, getting a little bit of vitamin D when the weather's nice, and just kind of going for a walk by myself has been very therapeutic. And then on the work front, I have just been working in different parts of my apartment, which has been really good. So some standing in the kitchen, some sitting in the living room couch. Now I'm in the dining room at the table. Just really all different places. I was sitting on the yoga mat the other day, like listening into a call. So I actually find the variety is good. It kind of, I'm used to when I'm in an office, I'm like, kind of going from person to person, and I'm like never sitting. And people are always like, "Where's Jenny?" So this is kind of really awkward for me to be sitting all the time. So I encourage you to kind of get up and move around.
That's actually a great idea. And this is probably the first time in my life that I've actually been like jealous of other people's Zoom backgrounds. Like it's becoming a
I know, we got to step it up here, Claudia.
I'm failing that front right now, but
so we're gonna wrap it up. But I'd love to just end with a few notes of well, first of all, like I love the positivity of the name of your book. Yes, you can do this. How did that kind of come about?
Well, funny you say that. One part of the book is focused on affirmations and the idea that if, for things that we don't currently see or don't exist in our culture, even if it's an image of like a female as CEO, it's helpful to define an affirmation so that you can kind of hold the image of what's possible ahead of, whatever's already out there. So yes, you can do this is obviously a very affirmative statement. I think you and I talked, I was originally going to call the book You Can Change the Rules, because I really wanted to focus on why and how starting up can help you do that. But in conversations with the publisher and going through the writing process, started to think about, that first step of just helping people remember that, in fact, like we are all pretty much equal, right? In terms of our intellectual mindset, our ability to be creative. I think everybody has the ability to be creative. And so I really was excited to call it something super positive, like, yes, you can do this, to encourage people that there's really nothing standing in your way. And it's just a matter of figuring out, what you want to do and hopefully getting the right resources around you.
Yeah, I just want to leave on a really positive note that, like, I think this is an incredible time to start a business. I think women, we've seen the data that diverse teams that include women founders outperform. I think in recessionary times, we're going to really have to lean into performance. And I think women have a great shot at building, all of the next billion-dollar companies. So I'm super excited.
Yeah. Yes, you can do that.
Yeah, I think this book is just like, great inspiration. So I was thrilled that you wrote it. So thank you so much. This will be recorded. So if you guys, need to see it again, it'll be recorded, and feel free to share. And yeah, that's it. Any last words, Claudia?
Well, Jenny, thank you so much for not only reading the book when it was in its early stages and giving some feedback, but for taking the time now to do this AMA. I really appreciate it.
All right. Bye, everyone. Stay safe, and we'll see you soon.